Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the world's best investing podcast. I just finished my Oscar Health deep dive, and I've concluded that this company, the stock, has something like 20x upside if you assume that Republicans will stay aligned with their voters. By the way, none of this is financial advice and shouldn't be interpreted as such. This content is just for educational purposes only. But Oscar Health is trading at 0.4 times sales, even though, in my opinion, it's quite an extraordinary company, and I'll explain why now. And this is because people are assuming that Congress will not renew ACA subsidies, which is what makes um, health insurance affordable for many people. And as I was saying, this is unlikely. And it's also interesting that 64% of Oscar's ACA membership people come from red states. So actually, most of Oscar's members are Republicans. You would think that Republicans just don't want to make these people poorer and more upset, and then decide to vote the other party when the time comes. So it just seems to me like the market is probably not pricing the odds in correctly. And a company growing revenue at over 50% year over year. Well, I actually had someone comment on my written deep dive that insurance companies never traded above 1 to 2 times sales, but this is a company. They basically added 1 million subscribers in the past 15 months when the previous 1 million took them 11 years. So we are seeing an exponential acceleration, and they have a huge TAM. They have something like 40 something million additional ACA members in the US to scale through. So this could grow very quickly. And that's why I believe ultimately a company like this deserves to be trading somewhere between 8 to 10 times sales. And that's roughly how you get, the 20 to 25x upside on valuation multiple expansion alone, if you assume that Republicans are going to stay aligned with their voters, which I think is a fair assumption. If you believe this should actually be trading at something like 4 times sales, even 2 times sales, the upside is massive. Now, why do I believe that this is an extraordinary company? Well, they've had this tremendous user growth, and at the same time, they've managed to not only stay efficient, but become more efficient. So actually, just taking a step back, CTO now, Mario Schlosser, I hope I'm pronouncing that well, said in a podcast back in 2022, and actually this was also in some kind of public official statement by the company, that at the time they only had an absolute price advantage in 5% of their geographies. Now, this is probably improved over time. They probably have a price advantage in more geographies, because there's another podcast in which Mario is interviewed, and he actually explicitly states that Oscar Health seeks to share economies of scale with customers. So when they get more efficient, drop prices. Nonetheless, the growth that the company has seen in the past year, I think, is indicative of this sort of abnormal ability to enhance the value to price ratio. So we've seen this with other successful investments of mine, like him, Spotify. These companies are all just instances of the Costco algorithm. And what they do is focus relentlessly on delivering more value to customers per dollar spent, and thus ultimately widen the value to price ratio. Just deliver more and more value per the price that they are charging. And this is really a function of delivering more value in the offering and reducing prices in real terms over time, which I assume they've been doing. But anyway, the very rapid subscriber growth over the past year just shows that these guys excel at delivering more value, right? So health insurance sucks. It's a complicated process in the US and everywhere else. And I think that the growth this company is seeing signals that they've struck a chord, essentially. I did my LifeMD deep dive a few weeks ago now, and you could see how cash from operations wasn't growing all that fast. And that's because they're not really truly solving a problem that people absolutely want to be solved. They are somewhere in between HIMSS and something else. So they want to make insurance easy for you, but then they kind of do the compounding now too as well. And they're not really doing any of the two things at a level which just strikes a chord, and then you have exponential growth. These guys are doing that. And then I was talking about the efficiency. And by the way, of course, this is a summarized version of the deep dive. If you want to go check out the full thing, you have it for free in the blog, link in the YouTube bio, etc. But the thing that caught my attention was one, SG&A expense ratio, that's down big time, and then the MLR, the medical loss ratio as well. So SG&A for expense ratio for the year 2023 was 24.3%. Then in 2024, it came down quite a bit to the sort of 20-21% range. And then in Q1 2025, it actually came in at 15.8%, which was down from 19.1% in Q4 2024. So that's what I was saying. These guys, firstly, they've obviously struck a chord. They have some kind of product market fit. And then they seem to have the organizational capabilities to, while they sustain this massive subscriber growth, get more efficient. So again, even just quarter over quarter, I think the increase in efficiency is incredible. The SG&A expense ratio came down from 19.1% in Q4 2024 to 15.8% in Q1 2025. So obviously, what this signals is that you have a company which I think is quite capable. Then the MLR, very interesting. I wouldn't take MLR, the medical loss ratio, which by the way is what percentage of premiums, are spent on medical care. I wouldn't take that at face value, because actually the end goal is not minimizing MLR in the abstract, which by the way, ACA, the Affordable Care Act, obliges insurance companies to spend at least 80% of premiums on MLR. So that's the floor. The goal is not minimizing that to 80 alone. It's basically delivering the maximum value to end customers with a minimum MLR. So it's a little bit like Spotify when they move their fees around the place. Lately, it's been price hikes, obviously, but it's kind of like at times they will make investments to ultimately maximize scale. So what you want is to become the biggest player in the space. That's how you get more data, better AI models, moats, etc., more moat, and so forth, right? But basically, there will be times when increasing the MLR disproportionately will generate, and management will identify this, I assume, because they seem quite capable. It will just generate a lot more growth because you delight people more, and then they tell others. So cost of acquisition comes down and it grows. So there's always going to be a trade-off between MLR and the actual scale of the platform until they've saturated the market. Then they can keep MLR at 80%. But even then, the goal is not minimizing MLR. It's just delivering the most amount of value with the lowest MLR possible while maximizing scale over the long term. Because remember that when you deal with networks, the number one strategic priority is scale. Once you're absolutely bigger than your nearest competitor, well, that's basically all the leverage you need to, coupled with extraordinary execution, win, essentially. However, the data from Q1 2025 is pretty telling because MLR came in at 75.4%. So MLR was basically, let me just whip the number out, it was at 81.6% in fiscal year 2023. So such a low MLR in Q1 2025, although that is not the goal, and they're actually guiding for it to go up to the 80 to 81.7% range going forward, it just shows you, put it a different way, if these guys had any relative underperformance in terms of their ability to price risk, then with the sudden growth, 1 million subscribers in 15 months versus the previous 1 million in 11 years, that would have just sent the MLR to, whatever, 100 and, hypothetically, very high, much, much higher than 75%, because they would just be paying medical expenses for everyone if they sucked at pricing. So what this actually shows you, on top of the efficiency that is being showcased by the SG&A expense ratio gains, this shows you these guys actually price risk better with scale, and this is just the ultimate proof that they can do that. I reviewed Lemonade last week or the week before, and just that ability to me is not manifestly evident yet. I haven't seen them go through this massive period of stress, of strain in the platform, like as his 1 million subscribers in literally 2 minutes relative to their historic performance, and then outperform in terms of pricing risk considerably. So these two things basically show you that this is a company with quite extraordinary organizational properties. Why do I keep saying the term organizational properties? Well, this is what I look for in companies, right? So when Spotify was trading at $97.50, I was looking for asymmetry, obviously. And I just saw this massively growing network, with MAU's monthly active users growing at record pace. And then all these little signs that basically say these guys can drive the core value creation process of the company. Like Spotify is just getting much better at UX, thus delighting end consumers more than any other platform, having that translate into an exponential advantage in terms of user adoption, then using the data to improve the UX further, and then deploy additional verticals to ultimately increase operating leverage and increase cash from operations and then free cash flow per share, right? So with these guys, the fact that they've unlocked product market fit. As a result, they've had massive user growth. Then they get more efficient, as seen by the SG&A expense ratio. Then they suddenly get better, not suddenly, but simultaneously they get better at pricing risk, as evidenced by the MLR. And as I was saying, you can't really take that at face value. But I think that what we have here is just quite an extraordinary organization. Then the other thing that I think is worth watching for the long term, because these things, investment theses are never for 5 minutes. I'm personally going to be watching this company for a long time now, probably, as I do before I invest in anything. They can reduce regulatory risk by essentially tapping into other health insurance programs, such as is ICHRA, which stands for individual coverage health reimbursement arrangement. So this is basically a company like Uber or something like that. This is how they give health insurance to their employees. You can go look at the details in the written form of the update. Anyways, as the gig economy grows, I think ICHRA is going to become a bigger market. And basically, the last time Oscar reported the ICHRA numbers, they had 3.7K members in Q3 2023, which they haven't reported since. But I think that's an important trend to be watching for the long term, because that is how they sort of mitigate regulatory risk over the long term. But as I was saying broadly, this seems to me like an extraordinary organization. And then I think that the company is aligned with the interests of individuals and of the nation. So you obviously the whole health insurance thing is a monopsony. As I've said many times, there is really only one buyer in the healthcare industry in the States, which is insurance companies. And so the tendency is an inflationary market. But with that said, I think that politically, suddenly making healthcare more expensive for a given demographic that's very important actually to the Republican Party, I think is very unlikely. Now, last thing I want to add today, it's a 12-minute video. And this is actually meant to be a summary, but hey. Now, the other thing I want to say is that these guys actually have much more cash than debt. They have almost $3 billion in cash and actually just a fraction of debt. So I think the financials really add to the symmetry of the thesis. So just to recap, I think this is a great company. They have a massive TAM ahead. They have like 40 million additional Americans to cover. They seem to have extraordinary organizational properties. This is trading dirt cheap. Then the financials, the balance sheet is good. They are printing cash from operations. Although, by the way, once you look at the graph in the write-up, you will see, and I explained this, that much of the cash from operations that's registered is actually they have to pay to federal pools. I explained it the technicals in the written form of the deep dive, but basically, much of the cash from operations that you'll see in the numbers and in the graphs, much of that actually has to be paid to federal pools. So, but anyways, the trend is just, to me, this screams extraordinary organizational properties, likely process power, because a lot of the reason for which they have struck a chord with end customers is they actually make the operations of providers more efficient. So Oscar Health underwrites its own insurance products, etc., and then has this tech platform to make it easy for you to access the health insurance and ultimately get treated, but they don't actually provide the treatments themselves. What they do is they provide the platform for healthcare providers to come in, and then they make the operations of these providers more efficient. And actually, if you read through the quarterly earnings call transcripts since this company went public, you will see that the CEO mentions, well, this quarter we did this, and then this reduced provider paperwork by this percentage, this reduced time to value for end customers by this percentage, etc. So a lot of that is not just making a platform that's easy to use for end customers. It's getting deep into the operations of healthcare providers and just making them more efficient. And so this is a little bit like the WISE thesis in that long term. if they continue to compound on their core value drivers, which I've mentioned, is essentially just making stuff really easy for end customers via the UX, and then making providers more efficient and pricing risk better, which we've seen them excel at in Q1 2025. Then I think this is a little bit like the WISE thesis, in that it becomes a platform that potentially comes to power the operations of healthcare providers totally. So in effect, a vertical ontology whereby they have more data potentially, by the way, and we'll talk about the progress they've made to date, but potentially they come to have more data on how healthcare providers can be more efficient than anyone else. And that's a vertical ontology, a digital twin, if you will. And then that basically enables them to become a full-on platform as a service that providers use in the US market. It's very similar to the HIMSS thesis. I think if HIMSS continues to scale, eventually they have, and I think they're going to do that with MedMatch. They have a platform that can power the operation of legacy healthcare incumbents. It's interesting to have studied Oscar Health in that sense, because I think they will compete for that market. I already got the sense of that with LifeMD, but I didn't really see them striking a chord with end customers. I didn't see the explosive cash from operations growth, but I see it here. So I think these guys are probably going to be competing with HIMSS over the long term to become the go-to platform to essentially power legacy healthcare operations via data and by extension via AI models. But so I said I was going to tell you guys how they're doing in that sense. So they basically reported that they have over 500,000 lives on Plus Oscar, which is their third-party platform offering. But they did this for the last time in Q3 2024, and they haven't updated since. So they had a deal with Cigna. It was called Cigna Plus Oscar, which I know they terminated for a fact, but I'm not actually totally sure that they terminated Plus Oscar in general. They just haven't provided an update since in the quarterly earnings call transcripts. But anyways, I think that long term, I guess all these companies are going in that direction, which is basically delighting end customers more, getting more data, building the best platform as a result that then others can leverage. This is sort of the ontology grid thesis that I've spoken about many times regarding Palantir and Tesla, basically building the foundation for what I consider is going to be capitalism 2.0. Anyways, I'm not long this company because I'm not a political expert, and so I don't have absolute certainty on what Republicans are going to do. But I do tend to believe that the market is pricing this wrong. Of course, none of this is financial advice, not intended to be in any way. It shouldn't be interpreted as such. But to me, this is the classic asymmetric situation where the market is pricing a situation completely wrong, and simultaneously you have a company with extraordinary process power, very notable organizational capabilities, a strong balance sheet, positive cash from operations. So this does look to me like an opportunity, and I'm going to be monitoring this company closely. I don't believe the situation will obviously be resolved until the market sees what Congress does with ACA subsidies once 2025 is over. So I think plenty of time to study this, but I really enjoyed it, and I'm really enjoying. I won't use the term completing, but obviously enhancing my view of the US healthcare market. I have a conviction with HIMSS because it basically screams extraordinary execution across the board. And when that happens, I believe you don't actually have to be an expert in the industry to make a bet, a concentrated bet in my case with HIMSS. But it's just great to be learning about this because, as I've said many times, I do believe that we are going to see a kind of medical renaissance in which we go to, I think the industry over the next decade delivers exponentially more value to customers per dollar spent, all the way to essentially evolving the industry into preventative medicine, healthcare optimization versus just punctually fixing your health, and not really when you do need it acutely. So anyways, guys, thank you very much for joining me today. I hope this wasn't too dense. Remember that you have the written form of the deep dive in the blog, link in the bio. I posted a thread on X, which you might want to read too. It works similarly as the in-depth written form of the update. And if you enjoyed this, could I please ask you to share this with one friend? These deep dives are for free, and so the only way this grows is with your help. So thank you very much for joining me today, and see you next time.